I'm going back a little bit to because I think we need to really focus on this particular aspect, this Patanjali's 4 stages of concentration upon a single object. Because until we understand what we're doing, it makes meditation that much more difficult. When we understand what we're doing, welcome to our discussion, reading and discussion of Swami Prabhavananda's How to Know God. It is his interpretation of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And we're talking about Sutra 17 of Chapter 1. Now let us consider Patanjali's 4 stages of concentration upon a single object. The object doesn't necessarily mean a physical material object. It can be an image of the divine held in your mind. It can be a mantra. It can be a sound. It can even be dancing, as the Sufis do. So concentration upon a single object. This kind of concentration is contrasted with the other higher kind of concentration, which is described in the next aphorism. The concentration which goes deeper than all objects and unites us with pure, undifferentiated consciousness. Now, this is not something that is beyond any of us. If we follow the processes and what Patanjali recommends to us, we can indeed, with sustained attention and regular practice, achieve undifferentiated consciousness, pure, undifferentiated consciousness. Concentration upon a single object is, however, a necessary preliminary stage. When it is practiced intensely, it can take the mind very far, right out to the ultimate borders of undifferentiated matter. So there's nothing to sneeze at about this object-oriented meditation, mantra meditation, and so on, meditation on the breath. So anything to ask or comment so far about what we're talking about? The difference between object-oriented and non-object-oriented meditation, or anything else that you'd like to raise. All right. The words used to describe the 4 stages of object-oriented concentration are not easy to translate, and our English equivalents are hardly satisfactory. So they're not really equivalents, they're approximations. The stage of examination is said to be reached when the mind becomes perfectly concentrated upon one of the gross elements: earth, air, fire, water, ether. Gross elements: earth, air, fire, water, ether. This is followed by the stage of discrimination, which the mind, when the mind pierces the outer material layer and fastens upon the tanmatra, the subtle essence within. In other words, according to Sankhya, each gross element has a subtle equivalent. a subtle substrate, if you will. When you are chanting a mantra, which is sound or air, when you're chanting a mantra and you get to a deep sense of the significance of the mantra, it isn't exactly meaning, but it is significance in the sense of why it is important to us. The same thing is true of the Sufis when they dance, that twirling dance. They go beyond, they lose their outer body consciousness, and they attain an understanding of what it is they're doing, this twirling, this movement, and the music that goes along with it at a far deeper level. So when it pierces the material layer and fastens upon the tanmatra, the subtle essence within, that's discrimination. Next comes the stage of joyful peace, when we concentrate upon the inner powers of perception or upon the mind itself. Joyful peace, when we concentrate upon the inner powers of perception or upon the mind itself. This is a stage that we reach in this object-oriented form of meditation. Finally, there is the stage of simple awareness of individuality, when we concentrate upon the ego sense in its smallest, most elemental form, untouched by any fear or desire, knowing only that I am other than this or that. So those are the stages of object-oriented concentration. Any comment to make from your own experience of meditation, or any other wisdom or experience you'd like to offer, or any concern or question that you'd like to raise about this?
Go ahead, Oscar.
So I was just going back to the first part of the book, Raja Yoga, and Vivekananda writes a little story about how a king gets locked up in a tower, and then how you put a little honey in front of a beetle, and you first attach a very light thread, and then a heavier thread, and then maybe a big rope, and be able to climb through it. Which is, he's kind of hinting that we're growing from gross to subtle, and I'm kind of thinking right here is that we're getting into from gross, which is the object, to going through multiple layers of concentration to a subtler layer. Am I correct with the?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely correct. When we get to this discrimination, where we are aware of this subtle essence within the object, and that comes to us. It's not something you have to work toward. It's something that simply happens. And then this joyful peace, and then the simple concentration upon individuality, the fact that I am different from the I that is contemplating or meditating upon the object is different from the object that is being meditated on. And this is the real dawn of this witness awareness, this witness consciousness that Sri Krishna describes in detail to Arjuna in chapters 5 and 6 of the Gita.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Somebody else, Cindy, was it, that wanted something? Wanted to say something?
Yes, I was just going to say, when you were reading that last bit, there's the stage of simple awareness of individuality when we concentrate upon the ego, since in its use, you misread it as smallest, most elemental form, but it is simplest.
Simplest, sorry.
And I'm, no, this isn't to correct you. It's really to say that there is a difference, a big difference between smallest and simplest.
Oh, absolutely. Yes,
Simplest is really key here.
yes. And
Um,
thank you for pointing that out. It shouldn't be misread. Its simplest, most elemental form, untouched by any fear or desire.
I mean, that's like bliss that can be experienced by human beings.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Knowing only that I am other than this or that.
Yeah.
So thank you, Cindy, for the correction. It is an important correction. Anything else from anyone?
If I may, I heard the word, when you started explaining somewhere, the word external. Is the word external being used because we'll probably get to another place where it will be internal, and it's external because we're starting with an external object, and that's helping us to get to the concentration?
Well, yes, and the external object, as I said, it may be a murti, an image, or it may be a picture, a murti in that form, or it may be a mantra, or it may be the breath itself, or it may be, as the Sufis do, this whirling dance. You bring the external is where we begin. Then we, as he says, pierce that outer layer to the subtle essence within. And as I said, it isn't exactly meaning, it's more like significance. We understand why it is significant to us. As we pierce the outer layer of the mantra, we see that there is tremendous power in the mantra, and that the mantra is carrying us forward in a way that we just could never do in our waking awareness. It simply is not possible. So a fully realized soul, of course, this is all one unitary consciousness, and their waking awareness is no different from their meditative awareness. But for those of us in these early stages, there's a very dramatic difference between our ordinary waking awareness. And then when we begin to contemplate and concentrate on an external object, and then when we pierce that outer layer to its inner essence.
So if I may, you kind of put a lot of examples, like starting with external objects, which could be Ishta Devata. You could also be doing the Sufi dance. What I'm kind of amazed and curious is that in the same list, you've also included concentrating on your breath. And is it all same, or is there nuances as to what you should pick up?
Well, Bhaskar, each one of these is somewhat different. You know, this concentrating on the breath, vipassana meditation, it is one form. It may or may not even have a spiritual component to it. Often people who practice vipassana or mindfulness meditation, they do not have a spiritual component to it. Patanjali emphatically does, of course. So what he's talking about, but we can have a spiritual component to any of these forms of meditation, mindfulness, breath, any of these. It's easier for us to understand the spiritual component in something like mantra meditation or murti meditation, meditation on an image, or the Sufi dancing. Does that get it?
You're fantastic. No, that clarifies it quite a
Okay.
bit. Thank you.
Very good.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
can you expand a little bit on the statement that you realize the individuality is other than this and that?
Well, you've been concentrating on this or that. When you reach this deepest, simplest level of concentration, you are present to this witness awareness, this sense of I. It is a reflection of the one ahamkara. There is only one I. As Ramana Maharshi said when asked about the people that had come with a person, the man asked, well, if I attain this state of awareness that you're talking about, Master, and he gestured to the people he came with, he said, what about the others? And Ramana Maharshi replied, there are no others. There is only I. But it seems to us manifestly, look at the number of us that are apparently here, we, in our waking awareness, we don't have a simple sense of this I. We have a complicated sense of this I. That's what Maya is its complication and specialization. It is anti-entropy. And so when we reach deep within our concentration, we reach this reflection of the I, the ahamkara, this one. And we say, that's what I am. I'm not this or that which I am contemplating, and all of the other thises and that's that are part of our Maya experience, which of course are the whole idea of Maya is manyness, duality, eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Duality produces all of this sense of manyness, this and that. When we begin to realize in the depths of our concentration, which is now approaching meditation, that we are not this or that, or anything associated with this or that. We are the experiencer, the knower. Chapter 13 of the Gita, the knower in its field. Krishna explains all of this in the Gita. When we read it, with this perspective, we understand what he's talking about. Does that get it?
Yes. Is that the state of Savikalpa Samadhi, or is that one step below?
Oh dear, when we talk about above and below, it's a little deceiving. It's a spectrum. It's not above and below. We move along, move along, move along, and there is Savikalpa Samadhi is when one senses that there is nothing but the divine presence, and that this sense of I-ness, this ahamkara, is just a tiny tiny, tiny reflection of that. It's vast. Why? Because you have some experience of what is meant. It's an experience that you can't really put into words, but you have an experience of the infinite, the eternal, the changeless. But it is still an experience. That's why savikalpa samadhi rather than nirvikalpa samadhi. There is still this tiny I-ness experiencing the vast I-ness, or it goes beyond I-ness. But it's not above and below. It's a spectrum, and we move along just like if we were to start walking from here to Savannah. There would be hills and valleys between here and there. But it isn't that we would be above or below Savannah. We would just be walking towards Savannah. There would be this spectrum of our journey. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Anything else?
Om Shankaraji.
Yes, Bala.
I just wanted to, at least as far as my understanding, in Savikalpa, you still have the Triputi, the doer, enjoyer, and the act of doing. But
Yes, yes.
Vikalpa, everything is you see only Brahman, nothing else,
No. You don't see anything.
I mean, you don't see anything in the sense, it's a void, but that void is not really a void. It is, Brahman.
Yes, but you don't experience it in this sense. This is the differentiation between Savi and Nirvikalpa Samadhi. There is no mind there. You have left the mind behind, or in the terms of the extreme Advaitists, you have annihilated the mind or dissolved the mind. So there is no mind to perceive anything. There is only that. And we cannot say anything about it. No one, not even Sri Ramakrishna, was able to say anything about it. Try as he might, he brought himself to tears, trying to tell his closest direct disciples what he experienced in this state of samadhi where he appeared to be dead. They would say, well, where do you go? What happens? And he could not tell them, try as he might. All he could say was, when you get to that roof, you find that what the roof is made of, the brick, lime, and brick dust, is the same substance or substances of which the steps were made that took you to the roof. All of the steps are also made of bricks, lime, and brick dust. That's as close as he could come to saying, in other words, the one substance, Brahman, he who sees Brahman in every action attains to Brahman. Does that get it, Mala?
Yes.
Good. But I'm glad you brought that up because, this is eternally the question, Savikalpa, Nirvikalpa. And what Swami Prabhavananda would say to any disciple who came to him wanting to talk about Nirvikalpa Samadhi, he would say, well, first attain Savikalpa, then we'll talk about Nirvikalpa.
Yes. And also this actually, the way I'm trying to remember these things because he was talking about examination, discrimination, joyful pages. It is all, if you think about like examination is gross body or the gross world, and the discrimination is the subtle world or the subtle body, and the joyful is Anandamaya, and the ego is the simplest form. It is nothing but the Atma.
Yes. That's another language for expressing all this. Yes. That's more, that comes from a different yogic lineage, but it's talking the same, talking the same thing in a different language. Anything else before we go ahead?
When you say object-oriented concentration, is that like meditating on a mantra and thinking of your Ishta? Would that be
Yes,
object-oriented?
no, that's absolutely yes.
Okay.
That for us who take initiation in the Ramakrishna lineage, the mantra and the Ishtadevata behind the mantra or within the mantra are the object. But you know, this is what happens. We pierce the outer sense of that as something, and we begin to feel it in a more genuine, powerful way. This is what's meant by the discrimination stage.
Okay. So it's also persons on other spiritual paths who are concentrating on whatever object they find holy. I think that's what I'm seeing there.
Yeah, but that's why I brought up all those other examples.
And you mentioned Sufi dancing. Maybe this question goes out to the group. A friend of mine said she had done ecstasy dancing. Is that the same or some derivative of Sufi dancing? Does anyone know?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I've never heard that term. Sufi dancing is a very, very specific way of dancing. It isn't free form at all. It is not free form at all. There are people who go to kirtans and things like this, and they dance ecstatically. It's very free form and very self-determined. Sufi dancing, the form of dancing that they do, this twirling, is just as specialized and there's a very particular way to do it. And this is one of the things that your teacher teaches you when you become a Sufi who follows that lineage. Not all Sufis dance. Anything else from anyone? Thank you, Brahmadas. Okay. Now, having given those four definitions, the Swami says, such concentration is certainly difficult enough. It may take a lifetime to achieve, but it is still within Prakriti. Therefore, it has its temptations and dangers. It's still within Prakriti. Therefore, it has its temptations and dangers. To know the inner nature of an object is to gain power over that object. As the aspirant grows in concentration, he may find himself suddenly possessed of psychic powers. Now, these are not spiritual powers. They're just a different level of the mind that most of us never have access to because we don't gain sufficient concentration. But it is the same level of power that allows scientists sometimes to see beyond. This is what Einstein meant when he said, you cannot solve a problem with the mind that created it. And he said that his greatest gift was the gift of fantasy, which is indeed a psychic power. Your imagination is a psychic power. So you may find yourself suddenly possessed of psychic powers. You may be able to heal the sick, read someone's thoughts, foresee the future, or control certain natural forces. These are psychic powers. The possession of such powers presents a terrible temptation to misuse them for motives of personal greed and ambition. Hitler possessed a psychic power. To a lesser degree, Mussolini did too. They could literally hypnotize crowds because they had control of a psychic power that comes from the fifth chakra, the chakra of speech. So you can develop such powers and you can use them for personal greed and ambition. And it is unfortunately true that many people who dabble in the occult are seeking these powers and nothing else. In other words, and they come here, they come to this center, they used to come to the Hollywood Center when I was there all those years. You'd see that what they're really after is they're after control of other people. They're after perfect control of their own lives, misperceiving what control of their life is, and oftentimes they very much want to control others. So they're seeking, they dabble in the occult and are seeking these powers and nothing else. And then the Swami says, in one of his wry little bits of humor, luckily for mankind, such irresponsible experimenters usually lack the necessary determination so that they do not achieve very much. But Aleister Crowley achieved, if you know that name, he achieved much because he did have. And Ravana in the Ramayana, in the story of the Ramayana, achieved much. So there are those who do gain and use these powers. So before we go on, are there any comments or questions about these psychic powers as distinct from spiritual powers?
You're not saying the powers are evil, though. The power themselves is neither good nor evil. It's just how people choose to use them.
But if you choose to use it at all, you are risking becoming trapped. This is what the Swami will go on to say. It is not that they are inherently good or evil. As has been said many times in many scriptural situations, there is no such thing as absolute good or absolute evil within the realm of Maya. And psychic powers emphatically are still within the realm of Maya. So no, they are not inherently good or evil, but the temptation to misuse them is there. And so that it's not that it's bad and wrong, it's just a very big distraction. It's not what you intended to do, is it? You intended to achieve self-realization. Well, this is just another aspect of the smaller self. It is not the Atman.
Brother, is there any way to use them at all while being surrendered to God and while staying on the goal?
Well, you can see that those who are very far along the path, saints, sages, avatars, they are often, miracles are often ascribed to them. These are not really miracles at all, as Vivekananda points out in his preface and introduction to Raja Yoga. They're just the use of these powers. Christ healed the sick. Christ raised the dead. But there was no self-interest in it whatsoever. One of the tests within the Roman Catholic Church, and perhaps in other forms of Catholicism as well, of who is a saint, is those who can, there are demonstrable miracles ascribed to them. At the same time, there is no indication of any self-interest. They weren't doing this for any purpose of their own. And in the process of declaring someone a saint within the Roman Catholic Church, there is something called the devil's advocate that will try to prove that if this person did these miracles, that there was a self-interested reason behind it. And so Padre Pio, for example, Padre Pio is a relatively recent saint within the Roman Catholic tradition. There was great argument about before his sainthood was declared. Great argument about whether indeed the miracles ascribed to him had some self-interested component. Anything else from anyone?
Sri Ramakrishna once complained about the pain in his throat from the cancer, and he said, "Oh, for the sins of Girish." I'm wondering, when Jesus healed the sick, was he taking on their sins upon himself? Is their karmas?
That is the only way they free us. As Sri Krishna describes it in the Gita, it's described in the Christian scriptures more fully in the Gospel of the Beloved Companion than in the canonical Gospels. But it is by taking on, and it is also described in the evening hymn, Breaker of This World's Chain. How great was thy sacrifice, freely choosing thy birth in this prison, our iron age, to unchain us and set us free. Unchain us from what? Our karma. Set us free from our karma so that we do not have to take another human birth and can be set free or liberated. So yes, Sri Ramakrishna took on Girish Ghos's sins.
And
This is what is said.
since we are his devotees, he's taking on our karmas as well, is he not?
The simple answer to that must be yes, but there is the component of sustained practice and staying focused and not wandering off and just continuing to live a worldly life saying, oh, well, the master's going to take it all for me. This is why it's called the razor's edge. It's not a simple formula. But the simple answer is yes, the master, for those who take refuge in the master, he does indeed take their karmas. Anything else?
Brother, let's say if a person is practicing his meditation and mantra and everything, but there is some weakness which leads to him indulging in like a so-called sinful activity again and again, but he wants to get sort of away from that and again prays to Ramakrishna. So maybe Ramakrishna would take his karma away and then again he would indulge in such sinful activity, but he's still doing his spiritual practices. What about that?
Study the life of Mathur Babu, the son-in-law of Rani Rasmani, the woman who founded the Dakshineshwar Kali temple complex. Study the life of that man, Mathur Babu, and also Hazra. Go to the gospel, go to Sri Ramakrishna, his divine play, or the other translation, the Great Master, and you'll see that yes, indeed, they, as Swami Vivekananda said, we may fall 1,000 times, but we rise 1,001 times. As Krishna says in the Gita, I'm going to paraphrase, it's not called Mahamaya for nothing. My Maya is very hard to penetrate. So yes, and Arjuna asks Krishna, what happens if I fall from the path of yoga before I achieve realization? And of course, being every person and being dramatic, Arjuna says, won't I be lost here and I won't have any home in the hereafter either? And Sri Krishna says, no, my son, that's not how it works. This is one of the few times in the Gita when he addresses him as my son. No, my son, that's not how it works. No effort is ever lost. Now, when we take refuge in the avatar, which Sri Krishna describes in chapters 5 and 6 of Karma Yoga and also in chapter 12, and for that matter, it's between the lines, but it's very clearly there in that chapter on the knower and the field. When we take refuge in the knower, the avatar, the Atman, this is all, there is, after all, a one, only one. All these names are just for our convenience in thinking and talking about it. If we truly take refuge, then, as Sri Krishna says, if you truly take refuge in me and live sacramentally, there is no such thing as karma for you anymore. It's all automatically comes to where it belongs, to me.
Boy, Uri. Boy. Hello. Hello, you. Hello. Good boy.
We're hearing someone speak to their cat or dog or something. Anything else from anyone? All right. Well, I don't want to end on a negative note there. You know, this is all very positive, all very positive. It all leads in a very positive direction. It just requires our application. And the application is a motivation that is generated by our divine presence itself. So the Swami, after talking about these people who don't have the necessary determination, so that they do not achieve very much in the way of meditation or concentration, and therefore don't really gain access to these psychic powers or any other powers, spiritual or psychic. This answers your question, Brahmadas, and it also answers something that was brought up by both Bhaskar and Rajiv. What the Swami says is what matters is purity of motive. Cocaine in the hands of a responsible doctor is a beneficial painkiller. In the hands of an addict, it is a deadly destroyer of internal and of mental and physical health. So this is that business about there being no black and white. Cocaine in the hands of a responsible doctor is an effective painkiller. In the hands of an addict, it is a deadly destroyer of mental and physical health. And probably all of us who have known someone who abused either cocaine or some other mind-altering drug, even alcohol, and destroyed or severely compromised their mental and physical health. So the Swami goes on to say, occult powers are used by a saint with discrimination and non-attachment. He never regards them as ends in themselves or takes advantage of them to further his personal desires. That's why I said what I said earlier about the tests for sainthood. Christ, who healed the servant of his enemies, servant of one of his enemies, you remember it's the story of the centurion. The centurion comes to him and says, "My servant is dying. I know that you can cure him." And Christ says, "I have not known such faith in all Israel." And he says to the centurion, "Go home. Your servant is already cured. And it is by your faith that it has occurred." Christ, who healed the servant of one of his enemies in the Garden of Gethsemane. Oh, well, that's another story. Put the ear back. You know, one of his disciples cut the ear off when he was being arrested. And Christ took the ear and put it back and healed it. Christ, who healed the servant of his enemies in the Garden of Gethsemane, refused at the same time to protect his own life by calling on God. Refused to protect his own life by calling on God to send more than 12 legions of angels. In other words, Christ could have been rescued from his fate of crucifixion. At any moment, he could have called on God to send an overwhelming force. But the impure and unregenerate person who acquires those powers cannot use them rightly, and sooner or later they will cause his own ruin. The fairy tales of all nations are full of symbolic warnings against trifling with the supernatural. A few wishes are granted, and then the demon, genie, or wizard turns upon his master and takes possession of him, body and soul. So anything more from anyone about this particular aspect of these psychic powers that come with? And if you read the book Love Poems from God, you'll see that each one of those saints mentions, each one of those 12 saints, these realized souls, mentions that they have these powers, but they don't use them. By the same token, the genuine spiritual aspirant cannot be harmed by any occult powers he happens to acquire, because he regards them as merely a byproduct of the enlightenment he is seeking. In other words, they are not a spiritual power at all. They're just a byproduct of what he is seeking. Anything else from anyone? As for Patanjali, his attitude is strictly scientific. He describes certain techniques of meditation and their possible results. Therefore, he has to speak in due course. Therefore, he has to speak in due course about the occult powers, just as a medical writer has to give information about all kinds of things, all kinds of drugs, even those which are dangerous. But he warns us that at the same time, that if we are drawn to these occult powers, we shall miss the supreme goal. If, therefore, we do not heed his warning, we have only ourselves to blame. And that's the end of the discussion of the 17th Sutra of Chapter 1. It's now 12:56. We have a few minutes. Before we go on into the next sutra, is there anything more from anyone about what we've discussed and read and discussed of Sutra 17, about these forms of meditation, concentration and meditation, and what they can achieve, what dangers might arise? Anything at all from anyone?
Brother Shankar, this is Fred.
Yes, Fred.
I just wanted to make one comment, and I wish I knew more specifically how to reference this, but in one of the Gospels, there was an incident where Jesus healed, I think it was the lame guy.
Mm-hmm.
Could have been the blind man, but I believe it was the lame man, where he said, take up your bed and walk. But then he also made another comment to the people watching, saying, I could just have easily have said, your sins are forgiven. In other words, he equated his forgiveness of sins with the healing.
Precisely.
Explicitly, and I'm probably saying a little bit off, but my general point is, I never really understood that. That always confused me a little bit. And reading that, and it really makes a lot of sense that the forgiveness of sins, probably in the Christian tradition, is very similar to the taking the karma away.
It is precisely the same. It is exactly the same.
Anyway, that's
Sri Krishna says, turn to me in utter devotion, and I see no sinner. In other words, your sins are as nothing. They're not just forgiven, they're just as nothing. I see no sinner. And then he says, holiness itself shall transform you. If you make this, and of course, it doesn't have to be Krishna, it can be any of these great ones. Christ, of course, is very much our focus this weekend because it being Easter. Yes, I could just as easily have said, your sins are forgiven. And immediately he would have been healed.
was a shocking statement to everyone at the time.
I'm sure. Well, these were the reasons that Christ, he knew what would happen when he did these things. He knew perfectly well what was ahead for him. And it wasn't congenial to him, as we know from his talk with the Father on the Mount of Olives. Take this cup from my lips, if it be thy will. But if it be thy will that it go forward, well then, so be it. As Holy Mother said, who yearns to die? So these are precisely the same things. The forgiveness of sins means that these great ones take upon themselves the burden of the karma, the whatever was done in error. Because they understand why the error is there. As Christ said in the Gospel of Thomas, I stood up in the cosmos taking human form, and I saw that the children of humanity were all drunk. And my heart ached for them because they came to this world empty, and they again leave empty. And so he acted as he did, knowing within the context that he was doing it, what the inevitable result would be. He would be seen as a threat and therefore crucified. Anything else from anyone? Thank you, Fred.
I was wondering, on Sutra number 17, Swamiji actually prefaces quite a bit about Sankhya philosophy, etc., before, talking about the Sutra 17 itself. I'm trying to understand, could it be done before or after? Why was it specific to 17?
Bashkar, you're breaking up a little. Could you restate your question, please?
Yes. There was quite a bit of preface around Sankhya philosophy before talking directly about Sutra number 17.
Yes.
Kind of wondering why it could have, that preface could have been given to us right at the beginning of the book or somewhere else in this book. Why was it 17?
Well, because this is where the rubber begins to meet the road. This is where we begin to talk about the actual practices. And it needs to be seen within the context of Sankhya philosophy. It needs to be seen within the context of the 24 cosmic principles. The first 3 cosmic principles are beyond time, space, and causation. They're within it, but they're also beyond it. Mahat, Buddhi, and Ahamkar. Then, as he points out, it begins to devolve into the rest of the 21 cosmic principles. Mind, the 5 organs of perception, the 5 organs of action, the 5 tanmatras, and the 5 gross elements. Those together add up to 21. What is it we're dealing with? And from what are we dealing with it? We're dealing with it from the perspective of ahamkar. We're dealing with it from that sense of I-ness. What are we dealing with? We're dealing with these 21 cosmic principles. That's why he gives us this little background. If you read the Swami's Gita, he has an appendix at the back in which he describes the cosmology within which the Gita is spoken. The Sankhya philosophy is described there also. It's very, very different from our modern scientific reductionist point of view. From Sankhya's philosophy, everything devolves from spirit. Within the scientific reductionist point of view, everything arises from matter. It's a very different perspective. And so the Swami gives us some understanding of what it means for things to devolve from or evolve from spirit. They become matter. That's the actual last step. So then we're beginning to work our way backwards, as he says, back up the chain. And the first part of that we encounter in this simple, in this joyful and simple stage, third and fourth stage of this concentration upon a single object, we begin to realize that I am not this, I am not that, I am not these things of matter or even their subtle essences. I am the witness. I am not those things. I am that which is seeing those things. And for that matter, even creating, projecting those things. Does that get it, Bashkar?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Good. It's important for us to understand the the Sankhya worldview. Otherwise, we keep running head on into our scientific. And science is now beginning to outrun itself at the outer reaches of all of the sciences, whether it's molecular biology or brain studies or astrophysics. Inescapably, there is the quantum aspect. And it is not that spirit or intelligence arises from matter. It is the exact opposite. Consciousness, or as one of the great scientific thinkers of the early quantum days said, this is beginning to look less like a great machine than a great thought. And by that he said, he's speaking of Newton's machine, the great reductionist point of view. It's beginning to look less than like a great machine than a great thought. And that's why Scientific American, maybe 2 years ago now, published an article. It was their cover article. Is the universe pervaded by consciousness? And of course they answered it this way and that. But they felt it inescapable not to ask the question. Anything else from anyone? Thank you, Bhaskar. All right, we'll wind it up there. Dearly beloved, a flower at your feet for each one who comes to your open door. A flower at your feet for each one who stands by your open door and says, come to me, offering to break this world's chain that binds us down to ignorance, suffering, and death. A flower at your feet for each one who takes the path that you have struck through this, your jungle world. Om Amen. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all of the Lord's beloved children everywhere. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga, Durga, Durga. May we be safe. May we be healthy. May we be cheerful. May we have peace of mind. May we go forward in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being as our Mother and Father. Any final thought from anyone? Okay. In the morning, we'll talk about what can you expect from meditation. What can you expect from meditation? And there'll be plenty of time for discussion. Plenty of time for discussion. And then the last Sunday of this month, we're going to have an open forum on Raja Yoga, in which we'll go over the eight limbs of yoga as defined by Patanjali, why each of them is important. That'll be just a brief discussion. There'll be a guided meditation, and then there will be an open forum, a guided meditation according to Patanjali. So, until next time, dears.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Talk with you all soon. For those of you who do this, happy Easter. Happy Easter indeed. He is risen.